Good morning. Hey, I'm Dr. Ruth Roberts, the original holistic pet health coach, and with me today is Melissa Sherman from Calming Creek. For those of you that don't know Melissa, she is one of our certified holistic pet health coaches, certified pet CPCN. I can't even get all the initials out today. A holistic and animal communicator and energy healer. So she is very passionate about deepening our connection with our pets through communication, and providing personalized care, addressing the root causes, especially physical and emotional issues and spiritual needs. I think that's something that we leave out of the conversation quite frequently. Melissa empowers pet parents and with both knowledge and resources so that they can make informed decisions about their furry friends' health and wellness. So please don't miss this chance to learn what's going on. We're going to address a couple of interesting topics. So, Melissa, welcome. Glad to have you here this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
It is indeed my pleasure. So, we're talking a little bit about nutrition, and if you're, is your diet, is your pet's diet a trick or a treat? And kind of how nutrition can impact behavior and mood. So there's some really clear information that food has a massive impact on behavior. And why do you think that is?
Yeah, there's a direct link between the gut and the central nervous system. And so, whatever goes into the gut is affecting the brain and the rest of the body. So, whether it's highly processed or if it's just whole foods, where it's good whole foods and it's easily digestible, there's a big difference in what can happen with the behavior.
Right. And I mean the thing we think about, so we've been hearing for years now, eat the rainbow, eat the rainbow. Well, the rainbow is polyphenols, and the polyphenols are not for us. They're for the microbiome because these colors and pigments in plants are what encourage the growth of good bugs. And when we have the good guys on our sides, then we're making the neurotransmitters that help us stay calm, deal with stress in life, and react to situations appropriately. And I think that's a lot of where we have problems with pets. They're eating really highly processed carbohydrate diets. That's altering the microbiome. They're unable to really have the ability from weaning in many cases to develop a healthy microbiome. And then you just add in all the other things we worry about in terms of being spayed and neutered early, all the contaminants in the environment, and that's just a recipe for disaster, I think, in terms of how pets are able to respond to the environment around them.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah.
And then so, okay, how does this tie into Halloween? So if you've got a dog that's kind of already a little not so steady, and, what happens during Halloween that can really kinda trigger these guys?
So there's, kids in costumes. It's a little scary, and the knocking on doors. The season changing too, so there's more allergens in the air, mold, dust. And if they don't have a healthy gut and they're not getting the nutritions they need, it's just a domino effect of what it can do. So it can kind of exacerbate that behavior issue and that anxiety that the dog may present, or cat.
Well, and that's super true, and I mean, they've gotta be responding like, if y kids go out trick or treating, they come back well, and it's different than when you and I were kids, I'm sure, but they go to a Halloween party with everything's been X-rayed to make sure it's safe and doesn't
Right.
have stuff in it, right? But still, they're loading up on sugar, and they're coming back and being like, that's gotta freak
Yeah.
these guys out a little bit. Would you
Yeah.
think so?
Yeah, exactly. So they're gonna pick up on that energy for sure and mirror that behavior as well. So you're giving the kids highly processed food too, right? Like that candy's full of sugar. It's the same type of thing. It's the same recipe for disaster, I suppose, where you're just kind of feeding that anxiety, feeding that bad behavior.
Yeah, and then all the colors and dyes that make them these astonishing colors and all that good stuff. So
Yeah.
when you've
So
worked with
obviously we're
clients,
not feeding the dogs candy, but still
no,
it's
no,
reflective
the
of the whole
kids are
situation.
bouncing
Yeah.
off the walls. But the sad thing is that those colors and dyes, I think it's better now than it was some years ago. But even, I mean, in Beneful, like one of the most, like you say, Beneful, yeah, is one of the most egregious foods because it was chock full of all of these different dyes that are in the candy. So they used to, dye it with FD&C red number 40 or whatever it was, so you could have, and then the other ones, so you could have red, yellow, and green chunks because it looks healthy. Um,
Yeah.
so that's a whole set of other issues as well in terms of
Right.
creating behavior issues. Yeah. So
And they're doing that for us. The dyes in the dog and cat food is really for us because we eat with our eyes, but our dogs don't, right? Like they don't need all that. So there's that extra. They don't really need that. That's for us. So just taking a step back from that and like, do they really need mango salsa on their tilapia? It's just looking at the marketing of that highly processed food too, because is it really what it is? Is it the whole foods? Not
no,
usually.
no. Well, and that's it too. I mean, if you look at the pictures of Beneful now, it's got pictures of vegetables, but if you look at the label, you got to go way down past the vitamins and minerals that have been added to balance the diet to actually find the vegetables. So,
It's
so if that's
unfortunate.
below salt, that's like 0.01% of the diet. So this is really difficult. But the food companies, whether it's on the pet side or the human side, they're showing us pictures to make us think that, oh, this looks pretty good. And in reality, unless you turn it over and look at the back, it's like, no, this is still just processed stuff. So,
Right.
yeah, it's
But
tough.
a good thing that you can do this time of year, even if you are feeding highly processed food, you can incorporate some of these amazing winter squashes that are popping up. All of this, the everything from the fall harvest. It's you can just easily steam it, put it in a crock pot. You can just cook it down and use it as a topper. Even if you're not eating a whole food diet, it's a way to freshen up their food and give them these vegetables that may be listed at the very bottom of that highly processed food. But something like pumpkin, or like I said, the squashes, there's so many. I can't even name them all, but they're all great for dogs. And generally they'll eat them. Some of them you have to completely mash it up, but my dogs, they like it just sliced like I would eat it, and it looks good. It looks great in their bowl.
Right on. So, and that's another thing that I think is really important. So it's a process to kind of start from where you are if you're feeding kibble, because that's what my profession has told you is the right thing to do for the last 40 years. How do you even start that process of beginning to think about how can I make this kibble better? How can I freshen up the bowl, as you said? So
Well,
some you've
to
laid
me, the
out.
most important thing is don't overwhelm yourself. Start somewhere. Start with one fresh topper and then just build upon that. Even just 10-20% real whole foods being added to the bowl, you're going to see a difference in your dog. It's going to help settle them. It's going to help build that gut microbiome. It's going to make them feel better. It's also going to make you want to feed them more because you're going to see just a little bit makes a big difference. So the more you can add, the better. But if you start with one thing, like pumpkin, add sardines, just something simple that is not complicating your life, because the last thing you want to do is if you start stressing out about the food and trying to make it perfect, that energy now is going to transfer to the animal. And that's the last thing you want to do because it kind of defeats the purpose. If they're stressed out because you're stressed out, they're going to be like, I don't know if I want this food. So starting slow, starting calm, starting with what you can manage and what you can handle is the best approach to freshening up a diet.
Right on. And I think that's a really important concept too, because in the day of social media, and all these, first it was on the human side with the perfect plate and the perfect this and that. And now we're getting Instagram photos of this artfully prepared dog bowl. I think that's
It's
really,
gorgeous. but it's
It's
intimidating.
lovely. It is, but I think it's very intimidating, and I think that, food is food, and we need to look at it primarily as fuel and what fuels the body to, perform at its best. So, instead of putting energy into trying to match the image in front of you, what would you suggest if somebody's really starting? So we talked about adding toppers, and then if they're like, "Oh, wow, this is really helping," how would you suggest to start to transition, completely or halfway to a full, a real food diet?
Well, I mean, they can start with your ebook. That's a great place to start. That's where I started, and it has great recipes that do teach you just how to batch cook, and it's a whole nutrition. You're getting all the nutrition that you need. You're not guessing, so it's right there in front of you. Obviously, working with a coach is a great way to personalize that and to have support. It's nice to have support when you're making a big change like that. Takes a little of the stress and anxiety off of you if someone's kind of looking over and saying, "Okay, this is great." And then just not it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. So like getting out of the perfectionism and just striving for, like I said earlier, dogs are not eating with their eyes like humans do. So plating something like a chef, it's beautiful for Instagram. But if that's not your goal and your goal is to feed your dog or cat a healthier diet, just getting all those, the meat and everything that you can source as locally and as fresh as possible. But again, it's going to be better than a highly processed food like kibble or canned. So whatever you're going to do is going to be better than that, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And there's a lot of resources out there to help you just to get to that whole food diet.
Yeah, right on. And I think there's an interesting link. So we know, have you had this experience with one of your clients where they're working from kibble over to a whole food diet, whether that's the original crock pet diet, whether it's raw, whatever. Minimally processed food is key. But have you seen them have this experience where all of a sudden the dog's behavior is falling into line with just the change of diet? Is that
Absolutely. Yes, and sometimes it's linked to sensitivities. So they don't feel good and they're having, GI issues, diarrhea, vomiting, or they're itchy. They just don't feel good. So they start to feel better in that sense because that's healing. But there is a link to them getting whole foods, and I have seen it where there's a dog that's hyper and he chews things and he eats the wall, and I'm thinking of a specific dog. But eating the inside of the house and switching the diet, that wasn't even the intention, but that was the result. Was she called and was like, "My dog stopped eating the door." Okay,
wow.
bonus. We were just working
Excellent.
on yeah, we were just working on the diarrhea and the itchy just to make him feel better. But that was resulting him not feeling good was resulting in these behaviors. Because again, dogs will tell us something's wrong in their way. They're not gonna tell us in our way. So if they're doing a behavior that we say is bad or that's a bad dog and we don't like it, just stop, take a step back, and try to what are they trying to tell me? That's our responsibility, I think, as pet parents, as to take that step back and be like, "Okay, I don't like this behavior, but what is causing it? What are you trying to tell me?" And you can work with an animal communicator who could help give insight, but you have that power within you too, to just sit there and think, "What is it? What is it?" And if it is a sensitivity issue, they don't feel good. That's pretty it's an obvious one.
Right on. And so, you said sensitivity, and I think that's an important distinction to draw out is the distinction between food sensitivity and food allergy. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, so a true allergy is not as common as a sensitivity. And the sensitivities come from, the gut microbiome just not being healthy. And the gut goes into a state of, dysbiosis. And that's when a lot of these things can manifest, where they have GI issues, they have skin issues, is the body's trying to push those toxins out. It's overreacting to things. It's not a true allergy. So you can heal that through diet and avoiding those things that they're sensitive to. And it usually just takes a few months. You pull those out, you heal the gut, and then you can slowly work those things back in. Where a true allergy, you can never do that. If they're truly allergic to something, you're never going to be able to feed them that thing. And I like to just kind of compare it to, in the human world, lactose intolerance. We don't have an allergy per se to the dairy or the lactose. It's simply an intolerance. So our body is rejecting it. And it's very similar to the sensitivities that you're going to see in your dog. But unfortunately, because of overexposure to certain ingredients like chicken, beef, it's things that are commonly found in these highly processed foods. And they're chicken's the most readily available protein in the United States. It's easy to get, it's easy to cook with, and it's inexpensive comparatively. So it's when they have a sensitivity to something like chicken or beef, it makes it challenging, but it can be healed. We can heal that gut beyond those sensitivities, and then they can eat that stuff again at some point.
Right on, right on. And that's the truth. And so a good way to know is this a sensitivity or was this an allergy? Is you try to reintroduce that food, and if they react to it, you pull that back off your list, and then try again 18 months later. And if they react to it then, that's a true allergy. So that's a great way for the pet parent to kind of discern, okay, this is never crossing my dog or my cat's lips again. Um, yeah. So Jen's asking a really interesting question. So from energetics, for the season changing to fall and winter and the lack of vitamin D, creating seasonal depression in some humans, any tips on dealing with that in animals since they pick up on the human mood?
So I would suggest, what makes you feel better when you have the seasonal depression due to lack of vitamin D? Is it a sunlight? Is it, I mean, what are you doing for yourself? Because if you can regulate yourself, you can also help regulate the dog. But adding in more fresh food too. You're going to get those vitamins. They're going to be able to readily absorb those vitamins out of, like I said, the winter squash. I love winter squash. I'm obsessed with it, if you can't tell. They're just so dense. It's so dense. It's so densely nutritious, and it's filling, and it's so easy to get those at like the farmers markets, and they're fresh.
Right on. The other thing that's really interesting, and we don't think about this too much, we think about D3 supplements for people and for dogs. But the reality is that most mushrooms, whether that's just the plain button mushroom or the portobellos, they're packed with vitamin D2. Now, in the body, this can be converted to D3, but it's kind of cool because the body is able to say, "Hey, I need more of this stuff," or "No, I'm good for right now." And so I think this is a strategy to avoid vitamin D3 toxicosis because it's on people's radars. They're testing for it a lot. I'm not super happy about the test because I've seen that those results lead people into actually overdosing with vitamin D3 and actually creating toxicity to the point where the kidneys are damaged. So adding mushrooms to the food, whether it's for you or for your dog, is a great way to go. Real Mushrooms make some really nice products in terms of there's a 5 defenders for both people and pets, so you can get a really concentrated impact. And Dr. Rob Silver, I had the uh, honor of being able to hang out with Dr. Rob and Lee Carroll, who is one of the preeminent mycologists in the world this weekend at the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association. But I mean, it is insane. So, what Lee Carroll was presenting is that if you eat mushrooms, food based mushrooms, not the medicinal ones, your all cause mortality drops something like 30%. It's just insane, and people are living an average of 4 to 6 years longer than people that do not eat mushrooms. And so that's
It's
why
just
you're seeing
incredible.
It's nuts, right? And so this is very common in traditional foodways in the EU and much of the rest of the world. So they're trying to get us Americans to eat more mushrooms because this is a very, very simple tool to really improve your quality, overall quality of life and your health span. So, right, we talk about lifespan, like how long you live, but that sucks if the last 10 years you're debilitated in a nursing home. So we want the health span to go longer. And same
Right.
thing for our pets. We want them to feel good, feel good, feel good, and then drop off a cliff and die, because those years of chronic illness and disease are just miserable. But there's
Yeah,
going to be
and I'm glad you
some
brought up
awesome,
mushrooms. I because I saw so in the Southeast, we have Publix. It's a big grocery store. They're selling lion's mane in Publix, which blew my mind. It was the most exciting thing because I had only had dried, dehydrated, or I had never had it fresh. It almost has the consistency of meat, so it's really great as a meat replacement as well if you're looking for that texture. But and this is for people if you want to add something and it's good for your brain. So it's I was really excited. I put some in my food, I put some in my dog's food, but just cooking that fresh mushroom down for about 20 minutes, it's going to draw out all those medicinal properties for them so they can digest it. And it's incredible it's
right?
becoming available. That's exciting.
It is exciting, and it is really critical to actually cook the mushrooms to get the medicinal benefits out of them and all of the good stuff we're after. But yeah, I mean, lion's mane is amazing. The other one Lee Carroll was talking about quite a bit is tremella, which looks like this. They call it the gelatinous mushroom, but it's awesome because it can be used in place of like rice noodles, because it has that same texture when it's
Wow.
cooked. But lion's mane, interestingly enough, is also amazing for gut health. So is tremella. There's some evidence that tremella can help our pets that have gastric reflux, sort of that high acid, that many of them are put on some sort of acid reducer for. So I've got some really cool information coming out about that over the next few days. But that's one to look for. I think you can find that in Asian markets, usually in a dehydrated form. And then obviously, if you don't like mushrooms, that's where using something like a supplement is going to be really helpful because you can kind of get it down the hatch in a hurry. But there's tremendous health benefits to mushrooms for sure. Anyway, so just that was really lighting me
That's
up.
our
It
yeah,
was
that's
like
our mushroom
astonishing.
soapbox.
Yeah, but look for more because there's some amazing research coming out that is just like, holy smokes, why are we not all eating them? And I'm unfortunately allergic to them, although I'm working on it. So, and Rachel, this is a great question. What about capsule versus powder? If your dog is like just going to plow through whatever you put in front of them, powder is a much more efficient way to go because it's going to just give you straight mushrooms with none of the flow agents that are needed to be able to encapsulate. And it's one of those deals. If a capsule's the only way it's going to work, then go with a capsule. But it's just going to be really important to get this stuff into our pets. So for Hio, she's like the tincture. She's like, so what what we've been able to she just hates it, and she's like, "Oh god, okay, fine, get it
Yeah,
over with."
I have one of
But
those
what
too.
Yeah, but what we've been able to do is actually, start to put some of the mushroom powders into capsules, and then if we put a little butter around the capsule, she's like, "Okay." So, it's
That's
just
the
kind of
trick.
yeah, butter makes it better. So it's just kind of figuring out what your pet is okay with and not okay with. And the other thing is if they are like, oh no, 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 no form whatsoever, then that may be telling you that there's a sensitivity to something, right? So we're like, okay, we've got this plan and we're going to affect it. And then, but what we noticed, like there was a Chinese herbal formula that she was constantly spitting at out, and and I'm less observant than Mary Jo is, and Mary Jo's like, "Every time I give this to her, she spits it out." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, then let's stop it." And then all of a sudden her appetite improved. So she's again,
I
me, the stupid pet parent, she was trying to tell us that this didn't work for
yeah.
her. And I
And
was
I
so
think
bent
that
on
that pickiness, yeah, that pickiness, sometimes we label our pets as picky eaters, but they're trying to tell us something. I mean,
right,
but back to the mushrooms. Some of the mushrooms are bitter, so sometimes it is the flavor. Like reishi's pretty bitter, so sometimes I find that's a little easier to give in a capsule rather than the powder or tincture because they'll just gobble it. Where the bitterness sometimes, but lion's mane and the tremella that you talked about, they have no flavor. They just kind of
right.
absorb the flavors around them. So there's no bitterness there.
Right on, right on. So, okay, we went way sideways from where we were talking. But, so Rachel, that may be a good thing for you to start with. If he's a picky eater, it's hard to get him to eat anything that isn't meat because the 2 mushrooms we just mentioned, the lion's mane, the, tremella, have no flavor. You can cook that in with some of the meat, and now they're meat flavored. Yay! So
Yeah,
maybe he'll
yeah.
think that's a good idea. So that's an option too. And I think that's important. Like if you in Japan, they have this sixth taste, the umami taste, and that's kind of come over into American culinary circles as well. But it's the bland taste, and so these vegetables and food products that have that umami taste of virtually nothing, it's easier to sort of incorporate those into diets for pets that are picky because it will take on whatever you're adding them to. So that's another good strategy. Cool. What else can we talk about? So one of the things actually I did want to ask you is, have you worked with a client that had children with, say, ADD or autism spectrum, and how did that feel for the pets? And this is kind of a little left
So
field, but
yeah, no, it's a good question, and I actually have a really good example. Um, there was so I also have ADHD, and there's a it's back to that link between what you're eating and your brain. So when this client started helping their dog was nervous, had a lot of sensitivities. Um, they saw such a difference. They started feeding their child differently. They started asking questions. I cannot think of the book right now, but I will come back to the chat and drop it in here. There's a book I read for myself, and it's a doctor who he did so many studies on the different types of ADHD and the diets that help. And when I pull the sugar out of my own diet, I change. So in helping her dog, she was able to also help her child because she saw this relation with behavior and hyperactivity. And she was able to relate that to her child and change that and pull the sugar out of his diet. And then was able to see when she fed him real whole foods, there was such a difference in his behavior. He was calmer. He was able to manage like throughout the day, which was incredible.
and that's exactly why I asked you this question, because if we are able to see such a massive change in our pets when we feed them real food, um, how this can apply to ourselves, to our families is massive. What's in the American food system is really a lot of it is incredibly processed, and unfortunately, due to our farming practices, much of it is nutritionally devoid. So you have to work really hard to get the nutrients you need. But simply pulling out the things that are creating problems can have such a massive impact. As my friend
Yeah.
Sinclair Canali likes to say, your body is having a perfectly logical response to being poisoned. And unfortunately, that's what we're dealing with in many cases, and our dogs and cats.
It's the perfect visual though, because that is exactly what it is. And for myself, I wasn't taking care of myself until I started taking care of my animals. And then it was like, Oh, duh. And it seems so obvious, but it's just not because we've been so used to doing things a certain way. We don't really think outside of it. We're surviving this way. It's fine, but it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have all this pain and suffering in your gut and in your mind. It can go away if you feed your body the way it needs to be fed.
Amen to that. And Deborah's asking if it was Daniel Amen's book. And I
Yes, it
think
is.
his
Thank you, Deborah.
yeah. Yeah,
Thank you.
he is the pioneer. He and crikey, David Perlmutter. David
Yeah.
Perlmutter published the Grain Brain book, and Dr. Amen was one of the researchers that understood the link between diet and ADHD behavioral challenges. And also, he was the one that uncovered the traumatic brain injury link in football players. So he does SPECT scans on the brain to look at blood flow and the brain's ability to fire when appropriate. So really, really amazing work. And I think that that's where I started to apply a lot of his work to pets because we're seeing the behavioral changes, the cognitive defects, all of these things that simply because of what we're eating. Obviously, dogs are, with rare exception, are not going out and getting concussions, but there's
Right.
so much else that they're exposed to that's creating issues. Cool.
And there's something about how, whether it's raw or gently cooked, there's an enrichment factor to it. Because if you ate Cocoa Puffs all day, every day, or canned soup all day, every day for your life, it just takes something out of that experience of feeding yourself and nurturing your body. So when we give them that variety and feeding the rainbow and rotating what they're getting, they don't know what they're going to get for dinner, and it's fun. Like it becomes I I know when I switched, I could just see this life coming into my dogs. Like I have a couple of very food driven dogs, so like they'll eat anything that I put in front of them. However, when it's real food, they just get excited. They they bark at me. I mean, it becomes a game. Like, what are we eating? What are we
What
eating?
is
And
it
it's
now?
really
What?
fun. I know. It's just like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going as fast as I can.
Right on. And that's kind of thing too. I mean, if you're cooking, I mean, that is such an act of love, I think. Even if it's like, ah, damn it, I got to get this batch of food done, you're doing it because it is so critical to their health. But I think that's part
Right.
of what, when we take the intention out of food and feeding and cooking, then we lose all. I mean, this may sound completely woo-woo, but I think it is the truth. If we don't imbue what we're eating with love and with gratitude, then there's some sterility to it energetically in my mind.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I agree.
it's
And I can go woo all day. So
we
right
can go deep in
company
the
here.
woo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. So Melissa, how can people reach you? We've got, a link for you for one of on the store, but you've got an amazing site with crazy good information.
So calmingcreek.com is my website. If you want to reach out to me, you can also email me at melissa@calmingcreek.com. And I'd love to talk to you. I mean, I like to do ideally an animal communication to start off and then go into a health plan. How, like, what can we do from the animal's perspective? What's going on? Because to me that paints the full picture. um, we don't have to start with animal communication. It's ideally you're getting the animal's perspective. I do a whole scan so I can pick up on different things and how they feel emotionally, what they're feeling in their body, what they're holding in their body. And it can help point in a direction. Maybe there is pain, maybe there's something manifesting in the body that's causing certain behavior issues or issues with their feeding or their GI that we didn't know. So it's just more of a comprehensive package if you just go from animal communication and then into the health coaching.
And it is incredibly useful. Like Melissa was so kind to help us with Hayo. She was having a lot of issues earlier this year, which we're thankfully, I think, finally on the back end. It's been a journey, but it was really critical to help me move forward because I got stuck in being convinced it was something evil and horrible and awful. And so for that, I think that's really helpful for so many pet parents because we all tend to go to the worst case scenario. And it's really useful when you, the communicator, can help relate what the pet is thinking and feeling so that the pet parent can understand, oh, okay, that makes sense, and then is
Mhm.
able to move forward. So
And
thank you.
we attach to
Please.
stories. I'm sorry, we attach to
Yeah.
stories sometimes too. So sometimes that can help break up that story that we've been telling over and over that's actually just limiting that animal in their recovery, in their wellness journey. So it can help break that up too.
Right on, and actually, that's a great point. So I'm doing some work with Sinclair, who is a dear friend, but that's one of her things too, is don't get lost in the narrative about, all of the things that happened and all of the missteps and the egregious or lack of actions. The thing is what is in front of you at the moment and what can we do to support that pet? The story is important for understanding how things arrive to where they are, but if we stay in the story and keep banging that drum of victimhood, essentially, is what it ends up being,
Yeah,
then that's where we stay. So
yeah.
thank you
It's
for that.
limiting for sure. Yeah.
Right on. Right on. Cool. Fabulous. Well, y'all, thanks so much for coming. Apologies for the lateness. We will be back next week with some more amazing, cool stuff. So stay tuned and go check out Melissa. Hit her up. Um, Definitely, if you're at a place, um, yeah, and if that this is a good next step. If you're at a place where you just don't even know what to do, this is where an animal communicator can really help shift things forward and then help you create a plan that's going to help your pet move forward in their health journey. Cool.
Exactly.
Have a fabulous day.
Thank you.
Ciao.